Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome. So we'll give it just a couple more seconds to let everyone get in, and then we'll get started. Hey, Lindsay, how many? Lindsay, let me know when most of the people that are in the waiting room are already in. Are they already in for the most part?
Everybody feel free to say hello in the chat and also put questions in the chat later for John. Hi, Joan. I can see Joan waving.
All right, so you think we should go ahead and get started? I think we go ahead and get started. So good morning, late afternoon, or in some cases, in Lindsay's case, late night. I'm Bill Austin, one of the co-founders of Camino for Good. And all of us here, Lindsay, Kelly, Susan, Shay, Veronica, Fabio, and our new addition, John Michael, want to thank all of you for joining us. And as you know, we have a real treat for you today. But before I start with the introduction, a few quick housekeeping items. One, as Kelly mentioned, John will be taking questions at the end of his talk. So if you have anything you'd like to ask John, just type it into the chat box and we'll get to as many of them as we can within the hour. Also, John has donated guidebooks to an albergue that is selling them to raise money for themselves. Lindsay will put either a link up to that or an email up to that for you to get in touch with them. It's a great way to get a wonderful guidebook and help at the same time. And lastly, June 10th, we start our Camino Summer Challenge. So you'll start seeing some info on that, but we're excited about the new summer challenge we have coming out in June. And we actually have some more news, but I'm just gonna tease you about that. That'll come later. Okay, so one of the first questions you have when you decide to walk a Camino is what guidebook should you use? And inevitably, you are guided to, or luckily stumble upon, really the only guidebook you have. And that's John Brierley's Pilgrim's Guide to the Camino de Santiago. This wonderful magical guide soon becomes your most prized possession on the Camino and your most cherished possession afterwards. It's so much more than just a guide. In the same way, the Camino is so much more than just a hike. It guides you on a practical path and a mystical path, encouraging you to reflect on what you are doing and on life in general. When I found it, it was unlike any guide I'd ever read. I must have read it at least 2 times before I even started the Camino. Once on the Camino, you usually fall asleep at night reading it, and you start your next day with a cup of coffee, a tortilla, and John's guidebook. When we started Camino for Good, we decided to reach out to John to see if he would help us. It was really just a stab in the dark, as were most things back then, and still are today to some extent. We found an email address in the back of his book and wrote to it. To be honest, we would have been over the top with joy just to have received anything back from John, even if it was a no. But the very next day, we received an email directly from John saying he would help however he could. He didn't know any of us or even much about our project. I think his email, more than anything else back then, is what gave all of us the hope and belief that we just might be able to do this. Most all of our towns along the Francais route have quotes from John's book. His wife, Jill, another amazing author, has joined us for a cafe meeting herself. I don't think John realizes just how big a part he has played in helping us get to where we are today with Camino for Good. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be introducing one of my idols, Camino for Good Cafe, I would have thought you were crazy. But here we are, just another way the Camino keeps giving back. So that being said, it's truly my honor to introduce to you award-winning author, prolific hiker, and fellow pilgrim, John Brierley.
Well, hello, Camino family. How lovely to meet. I've met some of you before, and to meet other ones over this Zoom link. I love the Camino. Bill's introduction there, if you want to set up people for disappointment, build them up like that, and you're bound to fail somewhere along the line. So I'm human like all of us, but equally, I'm been on a journey, and one of the major turning points in my life was realizing that actually my life was a pilgrimage, because in a sense, in a real sense, what else is it? other than a spiritual journey. You know, otherwise I'm just thundering down a cul-de-sac called despair with only my own mortality waiting for me at the end. So the Camino has been a huge part of my life, and anybody who ever wants to talk to me about Camino and Camino affairs, I'm there. I mentioned to Bill earlier, he'll have to stop me, otherwise I'd keep going ad nauseam. But anyway, we'll see what we can go on this journey together in the hour that's up ahead. So I'll take maybe 20 minutes or so to look at or set a theme. And then, you know, let's see where you all want to go after that for the remainder of our time together. So when Bill asked me, I thought, well, you know, let's have a theme. And because we're all sort of confined to our homes or to our home environments or countries, we can't travel onto the Camino and haven't been able to for a good year or more. I thought, let's take the theme of there's no way out but in. And in a very real sense, that is true. And I think that's one of the things that the Camino teaches us. So I know this is headed, I think you call it a Camino Café or a Camino for Good Café. So I make no apologies to introducing the theme during this cafe period to deal with the wonderful subject of dying, because I think death is death to the old identity, the old ways of doing things, the old value systems that haven't worked, dying to the old consensus reality is a major function and part of the Camino experience. And I know it's an awful hackneyed phrase, but I build it in here because I like to have a few heavyweights with me. And so I bring in Einstein, you know, in that wonderful quote, we cannot solve the myriad problems that we've created here by taking the same mindset that gave rise to the problems in the first place. You know, when all is said and done, we need a more evolved consciousness. So how do we go about that? Well, it's certainly my experience, and in talking to the many people who've sort of written to me over the years, and I've spoken to over the years and met on the Camino, that it's almost impossible to make any fundamental change in our orientation, in our values, in our understanding of life and its nature and where it's going and what it's meant to do, unless we are prepared to make and take time out from the familiar. Go on a Camino is an ideal example because the Caminos are so accessible and so eclectic because they're open to everybody. No matter what your religion or whether you've no religion, no matter where you come from, the Camino welcomes literally everybody. It's a worldwide family. And I was saying earlier to Bill and the others that there's no other agency that I know in the world that literally embraces every single nation. And indeed, every year, not less than COVID year accepting, not less than 170 people from different nationalities are represented on the Camino every year. It's phenomenal. I mean, the United Nations can only dream of having everybody from every nation represented. It's a wonderful gift, because when we're on the Camino, all these sort of differences that we have, they just they melt away. Because if we think of it, you know, we're all on this journey together, and when we let go our prejudices, when we let go the familiar, when we let go the consensus reality, and when we tackle a Camino that, you know, the Caminos, most of them will take at least a month to get from a start point to an end point. I know lots of people do it in segments, but when we clear the decks and take off for that amount of time, something amazing happens, because our minds literally get emptied. So the first, week or two, we're frenzied, thinking, have we done did we make the bank transfers? Have we tidied everything up? Did we empty the fridge or whatever? And then after about week 2, we can't even remember our bank manager's name, let alone, everything disappears into the background. And then, which is why I always encourage people to to take a good block of time, because it takes those first few weeks, in my experience and the experience of most people, to empty out. Now, we're not only emptying out physically, because invariably when we arrive in the Camino, I don't know of anybody who's taken my advice to prepare for it. In fact, the opposite happens. Usually we're so frenzied trying to tidy up our desks and get things sorted before we go off. We're probably taking even less time to prepare ourselves physically or emotionally or spiritually or mentally for the journey ahead. So we arrive at the start knackered. Our physical and spiritual muscles are, haven't been used. And so it takes the first few weeks just to empty out the body of all the toxins that we've piled into it, to empty out the mind of all the stuff and nonsense that we keep circulating in it. And then something often magical happens, because in that empty space, something new can drop in. And that's the power of the Camino. It allows not only time for new insights to come in, but it also allows time to integrate those new ideas, those new understandings. And we don't often get that in life. Most people, when they come to an end of a program, I was at Fintron for many years, and people would come for a week-long program, an intense introduction to whatever the theme was, and then they would rush back home on the Sunday, Monday, and many of them, by the following week, most of them would hardly even remember the name of the workshop they were on. It's gone. So it's having the time to integrate the experiences that come to us when we take time out to empty. And, back to Einstein, there's no Dante, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. We're not going to find solutions in the world in the sense of there will always be problems coming up. I've got lots of plans to do a guidebook for the Camino Privativo, we can, all sorts of plans out there, but they'll happen, they won't happen. But really the essential thing is the change in mindset, the change in consciousness that Einstein talks about. That's the change that we're looking for. And there's no way out but in, because fundamentally, it's in our mind and our mindset that is going to change things, not the world. And changing the mindset and changing our value systems, in embracing love in whatever form we understand it, and trying to create more love in the world rather than less. The outside world might change, but the focus of so many of us is trying to change something outside. Now, things might change outside, they mightn't, but if we're dependent solely on changing the world outside, and we're not changing the world inside our minds, fundamentally the transformation isn't going to happen. Now, there's the Camino is often referred to as a path of awakening or a path of inquiry. And all the mystics and all the great traditions and all the psychologies and philosophies throughout time has been, asked that, one of the great existential questions, who am I? And in asking that repeatedly, who am I? Who am I beyond, the famous guidebook writer, speaker about Camino affairs? Who am I beyond this personality of John Brierley you know, 73 now. Who am I? Because this is only, you know, an identity that I've created for myself. You know, it's on my passport, but that's not who I am. And that's coming to that realization is huge. Now, a lot of people, when we get to ask these big existential questions of life, you know, there's a paradox nearly always in spiritual searching. So in a way, the question, who am I, is not supposed to be answered. It's supposed eventually to dissolve the questioner. That's the purpose in asking it. And here we come back to the theme of death and dying. So in asking the question continually, there comes a time when I, as the questioner, begin to move into the background. That's the ego death, because we can't enter into a real understanding of who we are. Self-discovery, the discovery of a self that we never really knew, the self that we're all familiar with, is the names that come up here on the screen. All these separated individual names. And we're sort of locked into this identity because we're in human bodies. So everybody has a picture of what Bill looks like. And now you've got a picture of what I look like. But beyond this egoic self, the familiar self is another self. And that's the self-discovery that journeying along the Camino can open up to us. Which is why I encourage as much as possible, if we can, if we're going to take time out to walk the Camino. And when I talk about the Camino, I talk about, you know, creating pilgrim routes in your own countries. I mean, when I was in Australia, I was really encouraging them. You know, the sacred landscape in Australia is phenomenal. And, you know, 10,000 Australians, as I said earlier, come over every year. We can't afford that. The planet can't afford that. We have to, not every year. I mean, some of the Australians I met have been over 10 times. So that's, you know, enormous, you know, come to the Camino once or twice, but create Caminos in your own countries and your own home environments. And also bring the Camino home to your own heart and mind, because, you know, it's like that lovely saying, you know, my life is my temple and my religion. We have to bring it home. We have to live our experience as spiritual seekers, searchers, pilgrims, because that's what a pilgrim is. That's what, you know, differentiates us as a pilgrim from a hiker. Now, we might be both, and we are both, you know, if we're hiking the Camino, we're certainly hikers, but the fundamental purpose and what shifts it and changes it is we have somehow acknowledged that we are on a spiritual path and seeking for spiritual answers. So in that inquiry, in that searching, we have this incredible support network, which we don't often get in many other areas of life. Here we are, I don't know, you said there were a couple of hundred of us here now. What an incredible support network we have. You know, Lindsay, I met in Australia last year when I was doing some talks over there. He's in Tasmania. It's 4 o'clock in the morning there, poor Lindsay. But, you know, we have, this is as pilgrims, as Camino family, it behoves us to support each other, to really go deep and ask these deep existential questions. Instead of, you know, staying superficial and on the surface, let's support each other to dive into our own self-discovery, soul discovery. And, you know, again, one of the beauties of the Camino, and I don't think there's any other entity that I know of in the world that is so broad and eclectic. You know, the Hajj is, you know, I would imagine 100% Muslim. You know, the pilgrimage to Lourdes is almost exclusively Roman Catholic. The Kumbh Mela, which has hundreds of thousands of people turning up every year, nightmare this year because they all turned up in the middle of COVID, which is no doubt one of the reasons why India is in such a problem, but that is almost exclusively Hindu. But the Camino literally is open to everybody. And most people I have walked with, you know, fallen deep into conversation with, are many, many atheists who are wonderful traveling companions because they're questioning, you know, without, you know, the dogma that so many of us carry around. So they're very open to, you know, embrace ideas from anybody. So we have this family that's eclectic, that is, we're human beings, so we have judgments. But when you meet people on the Camino, and I'm sure lots of you have had this experience, if you go on your own on the Camino, everybody you meet, you have no history with. It's very difficult to be judgmental of somebody who just you happen to fall into step with and, you know, end up in a cafe together when you've no idea who they are or where they've come from, whether they have religion or no religion. It's fantastic because it's so freeing. And because it's a pilgrimage, we immediately get permission, of course, to ask, you know, the good questions, the deep questions, the existential questions. Yes, we talk about the weather because we need to know whether to get our poncho out or whatever. But essentially, the conversations on the Camino are about deepening our understanding of life and why we're here, why we came, where we're going. Those are the questions that are so exciting and will bring us to discover that other self. You know, whatever name you give it, it doesn't really matter. Higher self, cosmic self, Christ consciousness, whatever. These are just names. And of course, the other great thing about the Camino, because there's virtually no dogma on it, we get this very broad understanding that it's not the words themselves that matter, because we always interpret things in our own way. But if we keep an open mind, then we can really learn. We don't have to agree with everybody, but when we open up ourselves and free up ourselves without prejudice to meet other people, you know, then life becomes so much broader, and we get opportunities to expand our understanding of ourselves. You know, some of the greatest teachings I've had along the Camino have been from atheists. Probably the most powerful teaching I ever had was from a Muslim woman who, in a wonderfully sort of dinner pub cafe we were in, about a dozen of us all arguing about how to solve the problems of the world. Back to Einstein, I mentioned earlier. Well, we were coming up with theories about this and changing the United Nations and heaven knows what we came up with. And she hadn't spoken during all this time, this sort of heated debate. And then there was a little bit of a lull, and I looked at her and I said, and you know, and Fatima, what about you? And just in a very quiet voice, she said, well, there's only one solution, really. And so we all sort of, you know, bent forward to, you know, listen, what on earth was this? And she simply said, Allah, Allah. You know, it was I mean, we were all stunned into silence. It was just, whew, you know, quite remarkable. You know, we say God is, and then we cease to speak. I've taken 25 minutes, and I said I'd only take 20.
No, it's fantastic.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it would be, I think it would be so easy for us to leave. I know for me anyhow, to listen and just take it all in as much as possible. And we so much appreciate the time we spent. But I think maybe it'd be a good time at this point, if you'd like to, John, we can move over to some questions. We have some coming in from the different programs around. If you think it's a good time for that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So we got all over the board. I think I'll start with just the first one that came in, since she was the first one from Cindy, and she was wondering, she had heard you might be doing a guidebook for the Via Pondiense, basically the Le Puy route. She was wondering if that was true or not.
Probably not. I think my next venture will be maybe the Camino Primitivo. You see, part of the problem was when I started this little venture, it was sort of quite interesting. And I was very much called to do this. It didn't make sense to me at the time. And I sort of slightly misunderstood the instructions. And I thought I was going to write 12 main guidebooks for the 12 main routes into Santiago. But either the information, or certainly in my own mind, I hadn't realized or thought that they would become, successful, and that part of the success of them would be that they had to be updated every year. So every year I walk basically half a dozen routes, and when most people go off to walk a Camino, if they're walking from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, for instance, to Santiago, they go off and they walk it, and it's, whatever it is, 780 kilometers. But my Camino is well over 1,000, because there are many alternative routes, and they've all got to be walked. And indeed, I love the alternative walks, because they've got fewer people on them, and so it's very important to get that information right, because if I'm sending people off the main route where you've got lots of pilgrims up ahead and you can see where you're going, these alternative routes, require quite a bit of focus. And then when I've, arrived in Santiago, which I've arrived there down the Camino Frances at least 50 times, and then I have to, hoof it off, get a train up to Porto or onto Lisbon, and start walking down there. But by heavens gracious me, there's 5 routes. There's a coastal route, there's a central route, there's a alternativo espiritual. I mean, it goes on and it's wonderful. But there's only one of me, and I'm 73, and God, thank heavens I'm fit, and I love walking, and walking probably keeps me fit. But no, I think the short answer has to be, I think Le Puy has to probably not be on the list.
Okay, interesting. So there's a quick one. A friend of yours, John Schaefer, is in, and he'd like to say hello to you.
Hello, John. I can't see her on my screen, but she's a great sister. She really is a spiritual sister. So wherever you are, how lovely to know that you're there, Joan. That's wonderful. How about a Camino on the Hawaii?
My day. You have made my day. I didn't know you were having this talk, and I got an email this morning from Eventbrite that I was actually going to delete, and saw you show up, and it's like my Sundays have come in. So
oh, lovely, Joan. Great to see you. Lovely. That's a great joy. I mean, I met Joan at Findhorn, and Findhorn, we talk about the Findhorn family. It's a spiritual family at Findhorn, and it's very deep, and really is sisterhood, brotherhood, just the same as the Camino. We're all family. We've all got the same spiritual DNA. We all came from the same source. So we're literally spiritual family. We can't be anything else. So from that perspective, I love you all, even the ones of you that I haven't met. I still love you. You're pilgrims on a path. You're here. You've given up this time to come and join this talk, this time we have together. it's wonderful. I just, I love it, and I love you all. And family is what it is. It's far more than friendship. It's a spiritual family. So great to see you, Joan, and I'm sure there's others there in the string that I've met before, and I can't see you, and we won't get time to say hello to all of you, but I'm saying hello from my heart.
That's great. Okay, so we have a question from Craig. He was curious. When you walk in the Camino, John, do you consider yourself being actually on a pilgrimage?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I mean, I'm on a pilgrimage right now talking to you. I mean, when we have an understanding that we're on a spiritual journey, then that's it. We can't ever not be on the Camino. When I go down and, the pubs are open here now. When I go down and have a pint of beer with my son, I'm on the pilgrim, I'm on a Camino. Of course I am. I can never not be. Now, admittedly, the first time I did it, it was a hugely transformative experience. I found myself walking in silence for 10 days, and that was a hugely deepening experience. And that's when I got the inspiration, truly inspired to write these guidebooks. I tried to say, no, this is ridiculous. I don't speak Spanish. I've never written a guidebook for what on earth am I want to be doing that for? But, so it was a very deep, intense experience. But no matter what happens along the journey now, there are days when I have my blisters and I get tired and I get, whatever. That's it. It's a bad day on the Camino, but it's still part of the experience. So yeah, the short answer is, well, I've given you a very long one, but the short and long of it is, I now can never not be on the Camino.
And that sort of, I guess, brings us to the next question, John. It's just from Jill, and I get this a lot. It seems to come up for a lot of people, and that is the one whether to walk alone or with somebody. And she mentions that she thinks it could be freeing to walk alone, but also maybe deepen a relationship you might be in. I guess her question is, what would you recommend, and what mostly do you do?
Well, I think everybody creates their own Camino. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. Whatever we do it, something will happen. I've walked with the greatest skeptics you ever met in your life. I've walked with militant atheists. But something always happens on the Camino. It's an incredibly powerful route. I mean, tens of millions have walked this over millennia. It's hugely, hugely powerful, and something always happens. So having said that, and that, we all make our own Camino, certainly in my experience and in people who write to me, if I go with my wife, and I've done that a number of times, the conversation is, often goes around the family and the children or whatever or whatnot. So we bring our history with us, and because we're, intent on our mindset that we come from, we're less likely to be open to other people on the route or experiences that happen to us. I've always found that walking on my own brings absolutely, it deepens the experience immeasurably, in my experience. Because, as I said earlier, I meet people without any history, and that's very freeing and exciting. Now, I would also say that the Camino, I have to be careful how I frame this, but there's probably no safer environment on which to walk on your own than on the Camino, for a number of reasons. When we walk the Camino on our own, if we go solo, we are of course never on our own. We can never be on our own. Not only are we with other people who we meet during the day, but we might also meet ourselves, our guides, our spiritual guides, whatever we want to term them or it. So by going on our own, almost by definition, I will meet people, other people, and I will meet myself much more likely than if I go with a friend or a family. And then I will discover that we're all family. which is what happened for me. So, you know, some people can't, some people need to go on their own, some people need to go with, you know, with others. But I certainly, in my experience, traveling on one's own, going on the Camino on one's own, can be a very deepening experience.
Great. Okay, here's kind of an exciting one. So we have somebody with us who is going to be going on their very first Camino in the fall. She's going to walk. It's Jamie walking the Portuguese way, and they'd just like to know if you had any advice for a first-time pilgrim.
So, what time of year are you going?
She says she's leaving in the fall.
Oh,
so it'll be the fall.
Oh, well, that's a lovely. By fall, you mean sort of, you know, August, September, October, maybe. Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's a lovely time to travel. You know, with the Portuguese route, you have a cooling breeze coming in from the Atlantic always. So the climate can be very easy to walk with. You know, the main route from France can get very hot, but you've got all this Atlantic breeze. Now, if she's going as a first-time pilgrim, I would recommend that she goes from Porto. She doesn't try and. Can you ask where is she starting, or where does she intend to start?
Okay, 1 second. Let's see. Lisbon.
Okay, so fine. Now, what you need to know is that from Lisbon, relatively few pilgrims start in Lisbon. I mean, we're talking about a couple of thousand, you know, spread over a year, whereas from Porto, we're talking about tens of thousands. So you know, it will be, I've met some beautiful people on the Portuguese way. I mean, they're so friendly. It's an incredible country. There is now, as of literally, you know, the last year or two, there are now official and private pilgrim hostels now all along the way. Before, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I'd have said, no, you know, if it's a solo pilgrim, probably don't start in Lisbon, because the infrastructure wasn't there. It is there now, but you go through some relatively remote areas between Lisbon and Porto, so rural areas. So it would be useful to have a bit of Portuguese, because a lot of people, you know, don't speak Portuguese in those rural areas. Having said that, funny enough, because of the emigration from Portugal, you will find people who speak almost fluent English, because they've, you know, worked abroad, you know, they've had to go to America or Canada, or their children have. So, but it's fine, but do allow for, you know, do your planning carefully, and make sure that there's a, you know, accommodation or albergues, you know, where you're heading to. I do have a new book coming out, but I'm not sure it'll be out before you go. But if there's any major changes, if you go to the website, caminoguides.com, I post up any, you know, big changes there, so that people can sort of access that and know that if there's a big change, or there's been a route change or something like that, you can get that information before you go. So, you know, wonderful. It's a great pilgrimage. It's a great route. You probably won't meet all that many pilgrims on the way, but there'll always be a few every day as you go, because of course September, October, it's still a popular time of year.
Yeah, I know. For one of our founders, Kelly, that's her next route that she'd like to walk, is to Portuguese. So I'm sure she'll be checking on updates as well. Okay, so Antonia wants to know, have you walked the 140 miles from Winchester to Canterbury?
No, I haven't. Although I met, for my sins, I was part of a sort of an advisor on a BBC shoot some years ago, and I met a wonderful man there, trustee of the British Pilgrimage Trust, and they have done wonders in the last couple of years to promote and open up some of the churches to make all the routes, particularly popular routes like that, more accessible for people with accommodation and so on along the way. He's always trying to get me to go on one of them. But again, you know, any spare time I have, it tends to be the Camino, because I need to get out there to update.
Sure.
So my time is limited.
Okay, here's a kind of quick technical question. So in the guidebook, you have a mark, I guess it's S/O. Hope you know what and they want to know what they weren't quite sure what that meant.
Well, in writing for the shorter routes, like the Camino Invierno, Camino Sanabres, these routes that Camino Inglés, Finisterre, they're relatively small books, almost like pamphlets. So it's easier to pad it out. But when you get to the larger books, like Francaise or Portuguese, you know, we're talking about several hundred pages. Now, pilgrims are, you know, not too keen in carrying unnecessary weight. So I use a lot of abbreviations, but there is a page which gives all the abbreviations and what they mean. S/O means straight on.
Okay, straight on.
But if you write straight on, you know, 10 times on a page, you can find that I could save 2 pages by doing S/O.
Got it. So just straight ahead, keep going forward. All right, awesome. Debbie wanted to know if there was any recommendations you might have for daily mental preparations for the Camino before leaving.
Did you say mental?
Yeah, like not physical, but the mental side of the Camino. Is there anything you do for that?
Well, yes. I mean, you know, we're all, many people head off on the Camino because something dramatic has happened in their lives. You know, that's true for many people. You know, they've lost a loved one, lost a partner, they've lost their job, they've lost work. You know, often people head off because something major has happened in their lives. And that's particularly relevant on the, you know, these COVID years, which has sort of, you know, created a lot of big, deep issues for people. So, you know, I would always say to somebody who, you know, has been, you know, suffering in terms of you know, traumatic situations, grieving situations, to, if they feel they need to get some, you know, help, to have a, you know, check in with, you know, a psychotherapist or a counselor or somebody to, you know, make sure that you're in a solid, a good, strong mental state before you know, head off. Now, excuse me, I always recommend people to prepare a purpose for the pilgrimage. You know, write out, you know, what is it you're trying to, you know, what you hope to achieve by taking this time out of your life to reflect on your life and where it's going. So, you know, spend at least the same amount of time as the way I usually put it in preparing for the physical route as preparing for the inner spiritual journey. You know, there's all sorts of help there. I mean, I type in, you know, spiritual journeying, and you'll find, you know, I came up with something staggering, like, you know, 20 million hits on the on the web. So there's huge facilities there to help, you know, create a strong sense of what you hope to achieve out of it. I've got a questionnaire there in the guidebooks, as probably some people have seen. I really encourage you to, you know, fill up that questionnaire, you know, really think about those questions, and you know, prepare yourself in that way. And it's also useful to know that, I'm just going to take a bit of water. It's also good to know that along the Camino, there is a very strong, over the years, a very strong network of help has formed. So this isn't only help from the physical, you know, every albergue carries people who are experts on blisters and pains and aches. But all along the route, every stage will have people, whether that's in a church or a monastery, or whether it's in there's some very wise people in some of these albergues. People have walked the route and then come back and dedicated their lives to helping pilgrims on the way. So you will find help there as you go through the journey, the sort of help that you would need if you're asking those deep existential questions that and a lot of things will surface when you go out, head off on a journey like that. But it would certainly be a good idea to have a little mental checkup, a therapy, counseling before you go, if you feel that you're in a fragile state before you go.
Yeah, if I could just add to that real quickly. As I mentioned earlier, I read John's guidebook probably at least page back, front to back, twice before I left. And I found that as a way of, I'm not realizing at the time, but mentally helping me prepare for it with his wonderful insights and just the way that he approaches the Camino, both mystically and from a reflective point of view, that really, I think, helped me tremendously in the mental aspect of starting off on my first Camino. So I definitely recommend the book as well. Okay. It's Craig's walked a few Caminos, but it looks like his next one might be with a pacemaker. He was wondering if you thought that might cause any particular problems or not.
Well, I'm certainly not, fit medically to answer those sort of questions. But what I will say is that, in generalizing, I've walked with a baby of 6 months old. Well, she was being carried by her parents. And the oldest I have walked with so far is 94. So, age isn't necessarily an issue. I've walked with people, every year, hundreds come in wheelchairs, for the Compostelas. So there's people on the route in all stages. I met a young girl a couple of years ago who I came up, she was walking in front of me rather slowly, and I came up beside her and she was carrying a Daypack. People can be often very judgmental about Daypacks, feeling that they're not, real pilgrims. I'm afraid there is still some prejudice and judgments out there, but all good stuff to work with. But she said to me, she said, I have a very deteriorating spinal problem, and I was told I could never walk the Camino. And I was told by the doctors, that I mustn't do it. But she said, I've always wanted to do it. So I managed to convince them that provided I, got people to carry my backpack and walk with just a very light, Daypack with water in it. And I took very small stages instead of, doing this of 25, that's the average, 25 kilometers is sort of an average stage. Most people's bodies manage, and I reduce it down to maybe 10 or something like that. You don't forget there's an albergue every 5 kilometers. So I would have thought that the general answer to that question is that you simply moderate if you've got a pacemaker, for instance, or you've got a back problem or other physical issues, you can devise your own pilgrimage to suit you. There's all along the way, there's people who organize backpack carrying and all that sort of thing. So you can always get help to moderate your pilgrimage to meet your physical standards or conditions. As a general rule, I always say, and I find it myself, it has always been the case, if we tackle the first week, I'm talking about 7 days, sensibly, then the body adjusts amazingly to the regimen and to the physical exertion of the Camino. It takes about 7 days. Now, a lot of people, when they hit the Camino, they're so excited. They've been waiting for 20 years to walk it, and now's that time, and they hit the Camino and they race off. I'd have to say it happened to me. And I found myself racing over the Pyrenees racing through Pamplona, racing on all the joys of the world. Fantastic. This is about 25 years ago, so I was a younger man at that stage. But I reached Logroño, and Logroño has one of the largest foot hospitals in Spain. And the reason they have one of the largest foot hospitals is that pilgrims who don't heed the advice to take the first 7 days sensibly end up in Logroño with a whole host of problems. Mine was, I was at the early stages of a stress fracture. And the doctors there consulted and said, no, I'm afraid it's home for you, boyo. And I obviously looked dejected, and they said, well, okay, now if you follow what we say and stay with us for a week, and follow exactly what we say about, resting this foot, we'll examine you in a week's time. And if you're sensible, then going forward, we'll sort of, give you the quids in. So the first week, 7 days, take it slowly, and the body will acclimatize. Don't do what I did and race off with the joys of the spring and do too much early on. It doesn't pay. And there's many people I've seen around about 7 days in, wherever you start. If you're on the Francaise route, it's usually around about Logroño, and you see people weeping in the squares, and you go up and say, all's well, because you maybe met them along that. No, my Camino's over. So no, there's not very many like that, proportionately, but there's enough to heed it. So back to your pacemaker friend, get a nice sort of checkup before you go, talk to your doctor about what they feel is, you can sensibly walk in a day, and then adjust your Camino accordingly.
Great. And I guess that sort of leads to the next question we have, and it's 3-part. They were wondering, maybe after that first week, is there a general pace that you would recommend? And then in today's environment, would you recommend making reservations ahead of time? And is there a prejudice against Daypacks on the Camino?
Okay, well, I've sort of answered the Daypack question a little bit earlier, and saying that, unfortunately, there are still people who think, a real pilgrim has to, carry an 80-kilo backpack and, do 35K in a day, but that's, that's their problem. And we can help people deal with the prejudice. We don't want to prejudice ourselves against people who are prejudiced against daypackers. Everybody has a reason to go, like I was telling that young woman who just the joy she had. But she couldn't have done it if she'd carried a daypack, and she couldn't have done it if she'd done more than 10 kilometers a day. Now, coming on to the question about booking in advance is an interesting one. More and more, when I first headed off, there were no albergues. I mean, I was sleeping in abandoned buildings. There was no infrastructure there at all, or hardly any. Then it's grown very quickly since those early days, and now there are literally dozens of companies offering backpack service, including the Correos, the Spanish postal service, do it. So you can get your backpack picked up and carried forward wherever you want. The disadvantage, you can see the advantages of that. The disadvantage, here's a story. A couple of years ago, I met a lovely 70-year-old woman, and her family had given her a Camino trip from San Jean to Santiago for her birthday, for her 70th birthday. And when I met her, was fairly well on into getting towards Santiago, and she was deeply, saddened and to some extent frustrated, because when you book in advance, you are. She says, I come to the end of it, where my accommodation is reserved, and I suddenly find I've got so much energy. I don't want to stop. I want to go on. And there are other times when my backpack is 10 kilometers on and my knees are giving out and I'm exhausted and not sure I can make it. So that's the downside of booking in advance, that you're locked in to places. And also there is a question here about, I think it's a question about, how deep we want to take the journey of trust. I've never, ever in all the decades I walked this route, ever found myself without a bed. I mean, it mightn't be a very comfortable bed. It might be a floor in a church hall, but I've never not had accommodation. So, and there's also wonderful freedom in just heading off. The Camino gives us that opportunity just to head off, not knowing where we're going to stop. We might walk 10 kilometers and be tired and want to look around the town that's so pretty, or go in an alternative route, or we might want to walk 40 kilometers. And it's wonderfully also, trusting that somehow when we arrive at the end of the day, wherever the end of the day is, something will be there for us. And of course, something always is, always. Even if it's a church porch, at least we'll be out of the rain if it rains in the middle of the night. So I think I probably, hopefully answered that question.
Yeah, no, that's so beautifully put. I think any pilgrim who's watching Camino can absolutely connect with that. I know we're getting kind of towards the end of the hour, John. I think maybe there would be nice if, as connected you are to the Camino, do you have any updates on where things stand right now? What are you seeing with the Camino? What's going on in Spain? How the albergue is doing? Any just general updates for us from your perspective?
Yes, I mean, the albergues are struggling. They're all struggling. Many of them have closed temporarily for this year. You still can't, it's still very difficult to travel into Spain or Portugal or France to start a Camino. There are heavy restrictions. We're not at this stage allowed into those countries, for holiday purposes. A pilgrimage is interesting, how people would be received by saying, well, I'm on a pilgrim route. And one would imagine officials would be a little bit more, sensitive to that. There's a very great openness to support pilgrims in their journey. But we've also got to act responsibly, and certainly the albergues that are open have got a very rigid program to keep beds apart and that sort of thing. So there's a big safety factor throughout the Camino. I haven't heard of anybody who's been on the Camino who's had COVID, but I'm sure there are some. But there's relatively few people there because it's difficult, if not impossible, to get onto it. Now, the thing is changing every day. If somebody's thinking about going, like your colleague is talking about starting in Lisbon in Portugal, get onto the Portuguese government websites to find out what their requirements are. Portugal is quite low in terms of COVID, so they're allowing people in quite readily. But then you've also got to consider the requirements when you get back home, whether you're required to self-isolate or, so you need to not only find out the requirements in the country where you're going, but also in your own country about when you come back again. This has been a very difficult year. The Camino numbers are way down. I mean, we're the last time I looked, at this stage, we'd be talking about maybe 400,000 to 500,000 this year, because it's an extended holy year for a start. But that number of 500,000, I doubt if it's going to be much more than about 50,000. So it's about a tenth of what is normally on the Camino. So it's an ongoing situation. You'd have to, monitor it day by day, and just before you fly or take a plane or boat or however you get to your start point, check the requirements, the current requirements before you travel.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. And thanks to everyone here who's helped support in the way we have the albergues. It's I'm sure it's been helpful. Okay, we're getting about to the end of our hour. I think Lindsay just posted the information for Casa Susie where John's donated some books. So they have a fundraiser. They've started, and if you're interested, that'd be a great place to buy one of his guides. Our summer challenge kicks off June 10th. So I want to keep everybody heads up on that. And I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. So I don't know, maybe if Kelly wants to hop in here or anybody else on the team and maybe help remind people of stuff that I'm forgetting.
We're going to post the registration for the Camino Summer Challenge on Monday, which is May 24th. And then it'll start June 10th, but you can go ahead and start at any time. As always, 75% of the net income goes towards albergues and helping them along. We've helped up to 29 now, and over $74,000 has gone out. Those are American dollars, but so if you have already hiked, you can under settings, you can hit reset and start over with us and do it again. So, and we hope you will. And so anyway, if you have not signed up, go to caminoforgood.com and also look at our social media pages, and we'll send post links to that landing page where you can go sign up. Thanks for coming today, everybody. It's so great
Fantastic.
to see all of your faces. And John, thank you for
Yeah.
your generosity, for letting us use your content and the app, and for inspiring all of these wonderful pilgrims. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Yeah,
It's been a great
thank you so
pleasure to
much.
be part of it. And I just wanted to thank you for all that you've done in Camino for Good, supporting the albergues and helping to, keep it alive, so that, when we eventually open up fully, hopefully next year, places have been able to continue and maintain their places with your support. So thank you for that.
All righty. So I guess with that, we'll call this cafe a quits. Yeah, John, again, thanks again. It's great seeing you. It's so wonderful to have you as part of this whole journey. And we look forward to more stuff in the future. And to everyone who joined us, same, safe summer. And thanks again.
Great.
Now, I think, John, you said you might hang around for a few minutes. If
Yes.
anyone's got any last minute questions?
Are we just on?
There was a good question about the book being ever available electronically instead of print.
Yes, there are, all the books will be electronically, will be available as ebooks this year.
Awesome.
Oh, great.
I still like carrying my paperback though.
I
The
like
only
having it a whole later.
I know. We're very late getting it. I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and luckily my daughter has come aboard to help me with the website and those sort of technical things. And she said, "Look, Dad, there's a thing called ebooks, and we need to get them up and available for people." So there'll be all the books and will be available as ebook editions, in the different formats, with the exception of the two maps only guides, which would only really relevant in a paperback format.
Bill, did you see that one about people recognizing him?
No, I missed that.
Oh, so John, Candida Silva asked, do people recognize you or your name when they see you on the Camino? And is your focus any different when you walk the Camino so many times?
Okay, so going backwards, so, having said that when I walk in my life is a pilgrimage. So of course, the experience changes every time I walk it, because that's life, isn't it? But I think that one of the things that I didn't initially, when I started this, I wanted people to feel I was with them. I was, part of the journey. I'd done it myself. I was walking with them, in a virtual sense. And so I put a photograph of myself in the guidebooks to personalize it so people could identify with me. And I still think that's a nice thing. It's a part of, people often write in and say they felt I was walking with them and I was, there for them. And so, but the downside of that is that I'm almost immediately recognized. And of course, once I'm recognized, then the word, goes up and down the trail. I'm a man, a typical man, and I can only ever do one thing at a time. Now, the problem with that is that, I cannot talk to somebody and, take a note that the water fountain that was there, is now taken away and I need to cross it out of the book, or that there's a new water font somewhere I need to put it in. And if somebody's, engaged in this, because I love to talk about the deep issues, but when I'm on the Camino updating, I have a job to do. And so sometimes I have to sort of jump where I am to sort of try and arrive in a place where nobody knows I am. At least I've got probably some days before the pressure builds. Because of course I love to be involved. I mean, the most important thing for me is the deep experience that people have, the existential issues that arise for people. But I can't do that and create an updated guidebook that works. So it's a constant, nice battle that I have.
So we did have one quick question just to make sure the names of the books. And the one I've always thought it was it's the Pilgrim's Guide to Camino de Santiago, and then underneath that is the actual different routes. John, is that the proper way for somebody to find your books?
Well, so what I known is that generally speaking, it's changing, but certainly over the past couple of decades, when people talk about the Camino de Santiago, 90% of them are talking about the Camino Frances, which is why I call and still do the Camino de Santiago, and underneath that in small print, Camino Frances, and underneath that, the Way of St. James. That's the popular route, and that's the one that most people head off on. Then all the others have the names that are, the Camino Invierno, the winter route is called the Camino Invierno. The Camino de Sanabres is the route from comes from Pablo Sanabres. The Inglés is Inglés, Finisterre is Finisterre, Portuguese is Portuguese. So all the others have the name of the actual route. It's only the Camino Frances, which I call Camino de Santiago, because if most people, if you said you're going to walk the Camino Frances, they wouldn't. Where's that? They wouldn't associate it with. Oh, do you mean the Camino de Santiago? Mm-hmm. Partly what inspired me to write these other guidebooks was to take some of the traffic off the Camino Frances, and to that's been successful to the extent that now the Camino Portuguese has got a big numbers coming. Camino Frances used to have 90%, it's down now to 60%. The Camino Invierno, I took an awful long time to convince my publisher to meet the Camino Invierno. He said, well, how many people walk it? And I said, well, last year 78 did. And he looked at me and he said, well, and you want me to publish a guidebook for 78 people, of which presumably only 10 speak English? So I said, yes. Hopefully you're making enough out of Camino Frances to support this other route, because I've no doubt in my own mind that the numbers will increase dramatically because it's such a beautiful route. And likewise, the Camino Sanabres. I mean, it only has a couple of % of the people who arrive in Santiago, but these are totally different ways to arrive in the city. So it's helping to sort of move out and to, if you like, create a wider network of routes that people can use, partly for environmental reasons, helping reduce the environmental impact, but also to increase the economic impact for those rural areas who really have, very little to support them. Whereas if we can build up Camino traffic in those more remote routes, well then, the pilgrim dollar arrives with the pilgrim. And that can create, all sorts of new facilities and a way for people to make a living in remote rural areas.
Great, yeah. I actually hadn't heard about a couple of those, so I'm excited. I'm interested.
Yeah. And the routes from, Ingles has suddenly taken off because again, it's it's a sort of a week's route, but a lot of people when they arrive in Santiago, then, if they've got time, they head off to Finisterre or go on to Ingles. But or if they're doing the San Andres route from, they can, do loops around, but a lot of people tackle the Ingles and the Finisterre as caminos in their own right, as they arrive for a week or 10 days and take those routes in, and they're all beautiful in their own way. And all the routes now, even those rather remote routes that I mentioned, I've managed to convince, people in the more remote areas to, make accommodation available so that at least in every stage, at the end of every stage, there is a place to sleep. And in time it's a sort of a, supply demand, as demand comes, and especially in the smaller areas, that's everybody's got a couple of spare rooms in a house or whatever. So once the demand comes, the supply will very quickly follow behind.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. Kelly, do you see any other questions that would be awesome, or should we maybe let John wrap it up? We've gone about 15 minutes longer than he had originally offered, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah.
It's time we say goodbye and meet up again some other time.
We've hit it. I've been answering just some kind of general questions in the chat, but there's a lot of thank yous, John, and everybody really appreciates your words of wisdom. I did also put a link to Jill Brierley's website, inner-camino.com. She does amazing work as well. The Brierley super duo. So anyway, and so there's links to his, it's caminoguides.com, and there's links there, but you can remember that, caminoguides.com. Thanks again, John. And thanks for everybody for coming.
It's been a great pleasure.